Family, if you have not already, definitely hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up so that it will go throughout the YouTube algorithm. Today, we're going to be talking about something that has not really been in the mainstream media, and that has been the ending of the agreement between Saudi Arabia and the United States in what's called a petrodollar agreement. And if you're not familiar with the petrodollar agreement, let us give you a little bit of background and history and how this agreement initially came about. So we have to start in 1944. So around this time, we're dealing with the closing of the Second World War. And in 1944, there were 44 U.S. allied countries that met in Bretton Woods, USA. This is where they formed the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. However, the founding of these institutions was not the most significant event that happened at this conference. The most significant event that happened at this conference was called the Bretton Woods Agreement. And this is where the United States dollar was fixed to the price of gold at the price of $35. So what this meant was that if anyone had $35 and they got tired of holding paper money, they can go and exchange that $35 for an ounce of gold. It was called the gold standard. So this also meant that all other national currencies around the world would be held at a fixed exchange rate with the dollar instead of gold. So if a country wanted to buy anything from the international markets or even from each other, it would first have to get US dollars first. So the reason why the United States was able to implement this, because it was at a time where the Second World War was closing, and a lot of countries and other nations were devastated by the impact that that World War had on the world. And also, the other reason that it was done was because countries viewed the United States Federal Reserve System as a responsible system that wouldn't go around printing out all of this money like they do today, which is why we have all of this inflation. So from there, if you fast forward to 1971, America's trade deficit and debt had increased to unsustainable levels, and domestic spending was out of control. The U.S. had spent over $200 billion on the Vietnam War and was losing. And this and other debt incurred through poor fiscal and monetary discipline meant that the U.S.'s overconsumption was becoming a big problem. Because the dollar was exchangeable for gold, you had a lot of nations who started asking for their gold stored in the U.S. and giving America paper money back. However, when the U.S. started to run out of gold, they did what the Europeans always do. They changed the agreement. So the Bretton Woods Agreement was refined to the Petrodollar Agreement under President Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger, who went and negotiated a deal with the Saudi family to offer protection, military protection, to the Saudi royal family in exchange for the Petrodollar Agreement, which is essentially an agreement where, in order for countries to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, who is the leader of OPEC or the main contributor to OPEC, they would first have to get US dollars so that they can transact that transaction in US dollars. And what this did was this allowed the United States now to not have to worry about giving people back gold because people had to hold on to their dollars to be able to operate by buying oil. Another thing that it did was it allowed the US to always be able to print money and curb inflation. So when you have an economy and your economy or your government prints too much money, of course the economy becomes overinflated, prices go up, and the money becomes worthless. People can't afford to buy anything. Mm-hmm. And this is what happens in many countries. The reason why the United States doesn't have this problem is because they're able to export their money or the dollar around the world to other countries because those countries have to use that dollar to be able to buy oil. And this is one of the things that has kept many African countries in poverty because of the ramifications and the effects of having to have to trade in dollars to have an economy that will function. So when you have things like sanctions put on countries, restricting them from access to this financial system that they need to survive, then hence we see why these countries stay in poverty. And this is also the reason why anyone who has tried to challenge this petrodollar agreement or go around the petrodollar agreement, the United States has gone to war with or killed. So this was really the reason why they went after Saddam Hussein, because Saddam Hussein wanted to sell his oil uh, using the euro. The U.S. said no, and they went in and invaded his country. Same thing with Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi proposed that he was going to sell oil in a Pan-African currency to all African nations, and he was killed. So when you look at the different countries that have been invaded, where leaders have been overthrown, like Libya, like Iraq, and even Syria, all of these countries were countries that were trying to move away from the stranglehold that was placed on the world when the petrodollar agreement came into existence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not ironic that when you have these world wars, you have a shift in the global ecosystem. So what that is telling us is that the wars that we're seeing are built around economists and different key players in various nations coming together and saying this is the direction we need to go in, and it's going to take military force for us to be able to get there. So now when you look at Russia, who is been sanctioned away from using the SWIFT system and has been forced to sell its oil in a different currency or its gas in a different currency, and you look at China, who has been working to create a digital currency. Right now, they're talking about using blockchain technology, which is actually a distributed ledger technology that will take the middleman out of the process of distributing funds and keeping transactions logged. It takes the middleman out of that process and it replaces it with blockchain technology, which is more reliable than the current monetary system that we have today. So the reason why the United States is ferociously going after Vladimir Putin is because they know that we're in a time now where the US dollar being a world reserve currency is coming to an end. This is why for the last 10 or 15 years, they've been pushing this global warming agenda so hard. Because if you want to fight against the end of the dollar in multiple ways, one of the ways is to say, well, hey, instead of even if we can't keep people enslaved by the petrodollar system, then we'll tell people let's pivot to getting away from fossil fuels. So by us getting away from fossil fuels, now the countries who haven't been able to refine their oil for years or have had to buy oil from Saudi Arabia or OPEC using the dollar for years, once that goes away, their power will be weakened because people will have moved away from oil consumption. And when we look at how this affects African countries, when you talk about, again, as I stated, the sanctions, when you talk about countries in Africa that can produce or can mine for their oil, but they aren't able to refine the oil and sell that oil. So what it forces African countries to do is export their goods, their raw materials to European countries or Western countries for dollars, so that they can then take those dollars and buy oil instead of them being able to take those goods and sell them at a price where they would profit and benefit from it, because they're in a situation where they have to have dollars. The United States knows this, so that when you know someone has to buy something, then you know it is a seller's market. And when it's a seller's market, you can name the price.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these things align with, while we're seeing the coming of a third world war, because once again, they're trying to use destabilization and destruction to prohibit the United States falling as a world superpower due to de-dollarization and people moving away from this this uh this global currency system as it exists.
Mm-hmm.
You have over 94 countries that are looking to join BRICS, and you have the countries that are currently in BRICS who are working, testing out trial run scenarios now with this CBDC currency that they're creating. And there are pros and cons to this CBDC currency, because if these governments control it, once again, it's going to be a centralized currency that a government has control over. So everything about it is not positive, but it is putting the United States in a position where they have to fight. And this is why we're seeing all of the conflict that we're seeing now.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective there, brother. How you connected the Saudi decision to move away from the petrodollar and all of the implications, that it has for the American empire trying to be, the continuing to dominate the world, being the world's hegemon. Other thing that I saw when you raised this issue the other couple of days ago was part of Nixon's 1974 deal with King Faisal and the Saudi Arabia royal family involved the purchase of U.S. treasuries. One of the way that they are able to try to reduce the deficit, which is right now approaching $35 trillion, is countries like China and Saudi Arabia and Japan and other countries buy U.S. Treasury bills, and the
Mhm.
Saudis purchase their treasuries using petrodollars. Now, if they aren't going to use petrodollars anymore, will they continue to purchase U.S. Treasuries? So, I
And I
mean,
think the answer is going to be no, because we've already seen China start to sell off a lot of those treasury bonds, because what people are realizing that they understand the gig is up. They understand that you're not, those treasuries are going to be worthless,
worthless.
because the US is in so much debt. They keep printing money. They don't have anything to back the debt up. The only thing they have backing the debt up is the American citizens' lives. That's it. Either people that work or people that join the military. That's the only thing. America doesn't export anything else of value. So this is why you see China, which sold off around $54 billion in U.S. Treasury bonds just, I think, about a month ago.
Yeah, who do they sell them to? I mean, who wants to? They sold them back to the U.S. I mean, who wants
I'm
to buy?
assuming they sold them back to the market. So I guess
Oh, the
sold
markets.
them back to the U.S.
Okay, okay. Um,
But you're absolutely correct. That was a part of the deal. The Saudis, um, and the U.S. looked at that as a reinvestment. So essentially, the U.S. on paper told the Saudis, we'll give you protection. You sell your oil in dollars. You reinvest the money in the U.S. by buying treasury bonds.
Mm-hmm.
And in return, we'll keep you in power.
Yeah.
So the Saudis are giving up more than the U.S. is giving up, which is essentially how this money system works. It's just like the Federal Reserve. They print money. They go into a room and print money.
Mm-hmm.
And then they take that money and they give it to banks at an interest rate, which in return they make money back off of money that they created out of thin air. That's
Mm-hmm.
backed by nothing.
Yeah.
So now that these other countries are seeing, hey, these guys, they're not going to pay us back. They're not going to pay these debts. They're just going to keep the game going as long as they can, as long as they can keep it going.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the other thing is, as you mentioned, this new the blockchain currency and the other things that they're working on is now that the Saudis have decided not to renew this petrodollar deal. Will they accept the invitation to join BRICS? Because they were invited to join BRICS at the BRICS meeting, which was held in December in South Africa. And they never accepted the invitation. And maybe one of now there could have been a lot of reasons why they didn't accept it. But now that they see with the way, even though they are not supporting the Palestinians that people would have expected them to, they see the handwriting on the wall in terms of the situation there is, it has, raised the anger of the Arab masses throughout the entire Arab world. And a lot of these countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt, Jordan, they are hanging by a thread in terms of being able, for these the people, the families, or in the case of Egypt, the government of Sisi, they know they have to do something. And so now, with these events taking place, this decision on the petrodollar, now the question becomes, will Saudi Arabia accept the invitation to join BRICS? I think the next BRICS meeting is in Russia in October, before the U.S. elections. And there are just, a number of countries who want to join the BRICS, formation. So things are definitely spinning, and they are spinning out of control for the American empire. All of the games that they have been able to run are being exposed, and the only question is, how do they handle their downfall?
Well, right now you have countries like Canada who are bracing for a civil war in the United States. They're preparing their borders as we speak. And I'll ask the question, or I would assume, I would say that the reason Saudi Arabia didn't join BRICS at the invitation that they received at the time was to uh, wait until it was the right time where the U.S. wouldn't expect that some type of agreement on a global currency shift would take place. Them joining BRICS would automatically have signaled back at that time that they were looking to move away from this agreement, which would have ramped up the negotiations from the Biden administration to Saudi Arabia. Um, and it's only my assumption. You never know, but the more and more time passes, you can see the layers of chess moves that the countries that are currently involved in BRICS are making to try to get this currency rolled out, because I think they've seen the responses that the U.S. has done in the past when you've had other people, as we mentioned, Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, and others who have been swiftly taken out.
Mm.
So, that could be a reason why they were reluctant to make that decision at the time.
Well, I think they were working on. They were they were at the time. Now the the conflict in Palestine escalated, on October the 7th. But just prior to that, the Biden administration, by offering the Saudis all types of, U.S. Military hardware, F-16s, F-35s, Abrams tanks, you name it, they are offering all of these weapons to the Saudis, um, hoping that they could keep the Saudis at loggerheads with the Iranians. And they were hoping that Saudi Arabia would follow in the footsteps of Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, and sign a normalization agreement with the Zionist state. And Hamas blew that up. Hamas absolutely blew that up. Now the Palestinian people in Gaza, and increasingly ever more on the West Bank, have suffered a tremendous, paid a tremendous toll. But they blew that deal up. But Biden is still, throwing out all kinds of olive leaves and all kinds of, gifts to try to keep the Saudis, within their sphere of influence. But the Saudis said today that they weren't doing anything until the Palestinians had an independent state. So, the wheels are turning, and we'll have to see, exactly how this turns out. But I don't see anything on the horizon that looks good for the American empire at this moment.
Definitely, brothers. Just leave your comments down in the comment section, like, comment, and subscribe.